Well, hey guys, I think I've met most of you, and I don't know if y'all met my wife, Rondi. Did y'all meet Rondi? But I'm Bill Wilks. I'm pastor of North Park Baptist Church in Trussville, Alabama, suburb of Birmingham. I've been there senior pastor for 21 years. Been in ministry in all about 35 years. I know I look younger than that, but I started when I was 2, so I've been preaching a long time. But no, just teasing. But and been doing D-Life about 5 years now. I'm the author and lead trainer for D-Life. And D-Life is, I'll share with you about that, but it's a process of disciple making that we've just been amazed at how it's spread all over the U.S. We've led hundreds of boot camps. A boot camp's a 4-hour training for D-Life, and this is kind of an overview of it. And I appreciate Jim. Jim and I hooked up when he was up at Texarkana and came and did a boot camp for him up there. And we're on our way to Corpus Christi to do a boot camp for a church there. And so he wanted me to stop by and just kind of share with you a little bit of overview. Hey, so thank you all for being here. I'm honored for you to give me a little bit of your time. And I'm gonna go through this real fast. And any time you want to stop me, feel free. If you have something you want to say, wait, let's discuss this a little more. Or at the end, I hope to get through it so we can just see what kind of questions or feedback you may have. But let's go ahead and get started. I want to talk to you basically about 5 steps to build a disciple-making culture for church revitalization. That's a hot topic these days. If you go to any church conference, there's going to be a session on church revitalization. But how many times have you gone to a session like that and you leave without a tangible plan for how to do church revitalization, right? So church revitalization, though it's a hot topic, the best way to experience it is for you to build a disciple-making culture within your church. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you about, is building a disciple-making culture in your church. And what does that mean, to have a disciple-making culture? In Acts 6, verse 7, I love this verse. It says, "The word of God continued to increase, and the number of disciples multiplied greatly." And that is church revitalization. That's what we want to see. The word of God increase and disciples multiplying greatly. And when you think about the early church, they didn't have what we have. They didn't have nice buildings. They didn't have buildings at all. They didn't have big budgets. They didn't have any of that. But what they had that we don't have mostly is disciple-making people. They didn't have discipleship programs. They had disciple-making people. And that was really all that they knew to do, because that's what Jesus trained them to do. The church was launched with a group of common, ordinary men that were not professionals. They were blue-collar fishermen. One was a tax collector for Rome. One was a political zealot. And the only thing they knew to do was they knew how to make and multiply disciples. And so they started doing that, and they'd fill up a home, and then they would say, hey, we got to move to another home. And that process of just the early church was a disciple-making movement, pure and simple. And that process of multiplying disciples resulted in a third of the world becoming evangelized, until Constantine, the emperor, decided to make the church the state church, and they started making it professional, and then it stopped the movement. And so what we're trying to do with D-Life is see a disciple-making movement rebirth, and we're seeing it. I mean, it's spreading all over the world. We're learning how to make and multiply disciples again, not as a program, but as a way of life. It's a lifestyle that we live. So a lot of churches have what I call the golden calf approach to discipleship, and I love the story where Moses had led the children out of Egyptian bondage. They were in the wilderness of Sinai. God called Moses to go up on Mount Sinai to meet with him, and he gave him the 10 Commandments. He was gone for a longer period of time than the people thought. And Moses left his brother Aaron in charge. And so the people began to get restless, and they began to say, hey, where's Moses? We don't have anybody to lead us out of the wilderness. So they asked Aaron to make a golden calf. And the Bible says he asked them to give their earrings, their rings of gold, and he threw it into a fire. He took a graving tool and he fashioned a golden calf. Well, when Moses came down from the mountain and saw the people worshiping the calf, he was angry, and he said to Aaron, what did these people do to you? And his excuse is as humorous as it is outrageous. I think any 5-year-old could do better than this. He said, I just threw all this gold in the fire and out came this calf. And I'm like, really, Aaron? I mean, come on, man. I mean, you got to be more creative than that. But when you think about it, that's what we're doing a lot in our churches. We create all these discipleship programs and we heat them up and throw gasoline on them and we promote them. And then we throw people in and we hope that out is going to become a disciple maker, a person who's making disciples. But it seldom happens. I mean, sometimes it happens, but it's rare. At best, what we're creating are lifelong learners of the Bible who will go through a study and come out and say, man, that Beth Moore is awesome. I want to do that again. And Kay Arthur or Henry Blackaby or David Platt or whatever the hot teacher is, and they love it, and then they want to go through the next one. And I'm like, as a pastor for 20 years, I'm like, come on, man, it's got to be more than just one study after another. We've got all this knowledge, but we don't know what to do with it. So the Aaron's Calf approach to discipleship is not producing disciple-making believers. So how do you lead your church in transition from discipleship program mentality to a disciple-making culture? Well, 5 things real quick. Number 1, you got to pray it through. Everything begins with prayer, right? We'll never see any kind of transition in our churches without prayer. It's a movement of God. And so we've got to begin to pray, God, we need a disciple-making movement. We need people that learn how to make and multiply disciples. And God, how can we transition our church into that? So you begin to pray as a pastor, and then you get as many people as you can to start praying with you. I love the verse in Zechariah 4:7 where the Lord said to Zerubbabel, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. And so everything that we do, when we desire to rebuild, revitalize, it's not by might or by power, it's not by human ingenuity, it's by the Spirit of the Lord. So we begin with prayer. The second thing is you got to unite your leadership. If you're going to transition your church or build a disciple-making culture, you pray, and then you got to get your leadership united. It all begins with the lead pastor. Building a disciple-making culture requires a disciple-making pastor. And if you do not have strong leadership from the lead pastor, I don't know if you'll ever make any kind of transition in your church. It's got to begin there. And I think for most of my years of ministry, I'm ashamed to confess that I was not a disciple-making pastor. Now, don't get me wrong. I led people to Christ. I was an evangelist. I led good discipleship programs. I led the Aaron's Calf approach. I thought if we create these programs and throw people in, it's just going to happen. And I'm a very strong expository preacher. I preach the Bible. I don't preach short sermons. I preach probably too long. But yet, I never really learned in seminary how to live a lifestyle of making and multiplying disciples. I never learned that. They didn't teach me that. And I had to really get alone with God and learn how to do that from Jesus himself. So first, it's got to begin with you. Now I lead 3 discipleship groups a week. I lead men in discipleship. I multiply those men, and I start over again. And that's what I'll be doing the rest of my life. I'll not only be a pastor of a good-sized church, but I'm going to lead discipleship groups, and then when I retire someday, I'll probably lead 5 or 6 discipleship groups, because there's nothing I do with my time that's more productive than disciple men, multiply men out, and then keep going. So, it begins with that. And then it's also important to have a unified leadership team. Disunity will always disrupt a good plan, so you've got to work hard to bring everyone along. So when you have a desire to see that movement in your church, you've got to share it with your staff. You've got to share it with whatever your leadership structure is, whether it's deacons or elders or a committee in your church. You've got your E.F. Huttons, the people that, when they speak, everybody listens. You've got to bring them along. They've got to understand the difference between a discipleship program and a disciple-making culture. You got to get them to pray it through with you and lead them through the process. Now, the third thing is really what I want to talk to you about a while, is you have to develop a process. And a disciple-making process is an intentional plan for making disciples who make disciples. A discipleship program is not going to produce disciples who make disciples unless you have a process for that. I'll go into that in more detail. Most churches have nothing that remotely resembles Jesus and his relationship to the 12 disciples. And this is a missing link. I mean, think about it. Most churches, now your church might, but most churches, at best we have classes where somebody teaches, and that's usually lecture oriented most of the time, or it's put on a tape and listen to somebody more professional lecture. It may involve some class participation in prayer, but it's usually a lecture oriented. It's usually bigger classes. Maybe that's what our desire is, to grow 20, 30. And most of those classes will absolutely hate you if you try to multiply them. It's like pulling teeth. You're just going to have to fight them tooth and nail to get them to multiply. So that is usually the best that we've got. And that doesn't look anything like Jesus and the 12 disciples. So I think that's a huge problem. As a matter of fact, I think it's the missing link. If we're going to see church revitalization or revival in America today, we're never going to do it till we go back to creating a disciple-making movement that Jesus taught us to do. So churches have discipleship programs, but often have no clear plan to develop disciple-making people. The goal of the church is not to make disciples. The goal of the church is to develop disciple-making people. Jesus didn't call institutions to make disciples. Jesus called individuals to make disciples. And until we get that and go back to training individuals how to make and multiply disciples, I don't know that we'll ever see revival in America. Jesus taught us to make disciples in the context of a small discipleship group or a D group. We could refer to that. For us, a D group could be as small as 3 to 5 people who meet anytime and anywhere for intentional discipleship. Jesus discipled 12. I'm not Jesus. For me, it's a group of 5 is kind of my sweet spot. I can handle that really well, hold them accountable. I can be certain of their spiritual growth. I can involve them in evangelism and ministry. When I get bigger than that, I need to multiply. And the good thing is I can meet anytime, anywhere. This can happen inside the walls of the church, or it can happen at coffee shops, neighborhoods, schools, jails, wherever. There's no limitation. The threefold purpose of a D group, as modeled by Jesus, is to grow in spiritual maturity. I mean, these 12 men, all but one of them, grew in spiritual maturity, and that one didn't because he had a moral flaw, And so in a D group, you want to almost have a process where you guarantee spiritual maturity. They also served in missional ministry. Jesus didn't teach them in a classroom only. They went outside the walls of a temple and synagogue. They did ministry and evangelism together, and then he sent them out to do ministry and evangelism. So the on-the-job training is a part of disciple making. And the third part of it is to reproduce disciple makers. He told all of them, if you follow me, I'm going to make you into something. And he told them what he was going to make them into. I'm going to make you into a fisher of men. You're not going to be a lifelong learner. I'm not training you to be a lifelong learner of the Bible. I'm going to teach you, and then you're going to go out and do what I've trained you to do. And then after 3 years, he gave them the Great Commission. All right, now go and be a fisher of men. Go and make disciples. So disciple making is a reproducible process. If it's not that, it's not true discipleship. Discipleship is a multiplying process. And if it doesn't multiply, it's not discipleship. And if, people can argue that with me, but I'll be a rusty nail. I'm not going to bend on that. I think Jesus taught us it's a multiplying process. So when we talk about living the D life, which is a tool that I'll talk to you about, living the D life means to live a lifestyle of disciple making anytime, anywhere. Our goal through D life is to train you as an individual how to live a life of disciple making for the rest of your life. Once you learn how to live that lifestyle, it doesn't matter if you're here in Beaumont, Texas, or if God were to move you to Alaska, you can start immediately making disciples and multiplying disciples wherever you are. You don't need permission to do the Great Commission. So I don't have to have a pastor's permission to start making disciples. If a pastor says, no, we don't want you to, I would say, I'm sorry, I have a higher authority. I have a great commission from a guy named Jesus who said, I am to live a lifestyle of making disciples. So hey, I mean, no one can stop me from making disciples. That's my calling in life. So we want to train people how to live a lifestyle of making and multiplying disciples. D-Life is a simple, biblical, missional, and reproducible process of disciple making. It's simple. We can train people to do it who don't have the gift of teaching. We can train people how to do it that have never done anything like this before. It's biblical. The Bible's the only textbook that we use. We believe in the absolute sufficiency of Scripture. It's missional. We go outside the walls of the church and do ministry and evangelism because that's part of discipleship. And it's highly reproducible. People that go through this for a year could go out and lead a D group. It's a process that, not a program. The 6 practices of D-Life are modeled after Jesus. Everything we do is modeled after Jesus. Fellowship, teaching, prayer, ministry, multiplication, accountability are the 6 practices of D-Life. If you were to take the 4 Gospels and read them and you underlined only the verses that relate to Jesus and the 12, I promise you would find these 6 things. This is what Jesus did. He called his group to come and be with him, and he had intimate fellowship with them. And that's what I love about D-Life as me as a busy pastor. I had a lot of acquaintances, but now I have men that I've become blood brothers with because I meet with them every week and go out and do ministry with them in my D group. So I've built relationships, and I love that side of it. And you invite people to come into your D group. The way we teach the Bible is not your way of lecturing or anything like that. We read it. You know, the first year of D-Life, we're going to read through the New Testament by reading 1 chapter a day, 5 days a week. That's it. 1 chapter a day, 5 days a week. If you do that, you'll read through the New Testament exactly a year, 52 weeks. And we hold each other accountable to do that. And I teach them how to write 1 application point down a day from every chapter of the Bible. We use an acrostic called SPACE. Is there a sin to confess, a promise to claim, an attitude to change, command to obey, or an example to follow? And so they will use that to write down 1 application. Then we have a story that comes out of their reading every week. They read 5 chapters. There'll be a story from the Bible that comes from one of the 5 chapters. And we'll have somebody tell that story, somebody read it, and somebody facilitate a discussion. And you have about 15 or 20 questions that are provided every week in the journal or on the online version. Maybe you have my phone.
I do.
Okay, can you bring it to me? We have D-Life Online, which if your church signed up for it, you would have 4 years of study guides. New Testament 1, New Testament 2, Old Testament 1, Old Testament 2. They have a study guide every week, and they would have that Bible reading plan, a place to write their application point, and the story that they're going to cover, and then about 15 questions a week that will lead them in a guided discussion of that story. So simply put, I carry this around with me in my pocket everywhere I go. If I wanted to start a D group today, I could share a link with all of you. You'd log in, and then you would have this on your phone. And we would all have the same study guides. We would have 4 years of study guides, and we would have a sheet every week that we could use for our D group time. So it's that simple. But for people who don't do technology, your senior adults, we have the journals. We've got all 4 of the years of these in a journal format. So teaching is reading the Bible, storying through the Bible, memorizing. We have a memory verse for every week that comes out of your reading, and then you also have your discussion questions. We never meet and not pray, so no matter where we're meeting, if we're in a restaurant or wherever, we're always going to pray. Every D group is trained to do 6 ministry projects a year. We keep our goals simple and attainable, so every other month I'm training my group. I'm going to go outside the walls of the church and do something loving and kind, and we're going to share the gospel. We train our people how to use the evangelism Bible to share the gospel, And if you don't have the Bible, we have one push of the button and you have the gospel right there on your phone. So you got the gospel on your D-Life site as well. So if you have 10 discipleship groups, you're going to have 60 ministry projects outside the walls of your church a year. If you multiply to 20 groups, you'll have 120 outside the walls of your church in a year. So we're doing evangelism by your ministry projects. Also, we do evangelism by trying to get lost people to get in a D group with us. So if I have a neighbor who doesn't go to church, but he's not an atheist, but he just thinks he's going to heaven because he's a good guy, and I say, well, hey, I got a group of guys meeting in my garage. We're sitting 6 feet apart in chairs. We've got a space heater in there. We're just reading the Bible and discussing it. Why don't you come on over? Well, I don't go to church. It doesn't bother me. We're just reading the Bible and discuss it. Come on over. We'll fix you some coffee. We're seeing a lot of our conversion growth by people like that getting connected in a D group, and within a few weeks, they come to know the Lord through that. So we do evangelism by getting unchurched people in a D group, and we do evangelism by going out 6 times a year and doing intentional evangelism. Then this is the main part. We put high priority on multiplication. It's easy to multiply because every week you have 4 rotating responsibilities. In my D group, every week I have somebody that I've assigned to lead the group in prayer. Somebody's going to tell the story that we're covering. Let's say it's the Good Samaritan. They'll come prepared to tell that. A third person will read it. And then a fourth person will use the questions that are provided every week to lead a discussion. I'll probably facilitate the first 5 weeks, 6 weeks, model that, then I'll start handing that off. So even though I'm the leader of the D group, there's many weeks I don't even have one of the 4 responsibilities. I've assigned that all like that. That's rotating. We're training them how to lead as they go. So by the time you've gone through that, you're ready to lead a D group. We're ready to multiply. And then accountability is the glue that holds it all together. We're highly accountable in D-Life. We ask 2 questions every week. Did you read your 5 chapters? Did we look at everybody in the eye? Did you read them? If you're having trouble there, what do I need to do to help you? Can I show you how to use YouVersion and you can listen to it on your way to work? If that doesn't help you, do I need to call you up and read it to you? I'll be glad to call you. I mean, we take it serious. And what happens is men, women, teenagers that have never read the Bible systematically before begin to systematically read the Bible. And if I can accomplish that one goal, I've almost accomplished all that I need to accomplish. Because people cannot start reading the Bible systematically and writing down application points without their lives being changed. And so we also ask them, what were the application points that you wrote down? So we begin to hear every week what God is showing them. And then we hold each other accountable to our 6 ministry projects. So these are the 6 things that we do, and we have a tool that we put it in people's hands that make it so easy to do it. D-Life Online, as I said, if your church were to sign up, and it is cheap. One reason people like D-Life, it's probably the cheapest thing out there that you could use. And you can sign up for a year. You have a link you can give to all your church members. They can log in. They can save that link. And when they start a D group, they share the link, and it can just spread like crazy. When you sign up, you get 4 full years of D-Life. You also get the training to train your leaders. And then we have the journal for those that don't do technology. And some people just like the journal. And so they can buy the journal for like $10 a piece for a year. We've got all 4 years in a journal. My wife and I do D-Life boot camps all over the country. It's a 4-hour training event. We're doing Corpus Christi Saturday, where we bring in the people of your church and we train them the 6 practices of D-Life, how to model what Jesus did. And in 4 hours, I tell people in boot camp, my goal is 2 things. When you walk out of here, you will believe that you can live a life of making and multiplying disciples for the rest of your life. Not only will you believe it, you'll be trained to do it. And so our boot camps go really, really well. Even during COVID, we're having 80. We had 80 at Meridian, Mississippi last week at a boot camp. We had I don't know how many in Georgia the other week. So, and our churches are being safe. They're setting their tables up. It's going really well. It's crazy, but it's really good training. It's training that will be life changing. We don't talk about discipleship. When they walk out, they know how to make disciples for the rest of their life. It's life changing. All right. After you develop a process, and that's what most people are missing. When you think about Jesus, he knew what he was trying to make, and he knew how he was going to make it. He knew he was going to make disciples that make disciples, and he knew exactly how he was going to make it. Most churches don't know what they're trying to make, and they don't know how they're making them. If I were to ask a Sunday school teacher, what do you do? I bet you 99% would say, well, I teach the Bible. If I ask somebody that sings in your choir what they do, I bet you they would say, well, I sing in the choir. If I ask a golf cart driver what he does, he would say, I drive a golf cart. And I'd say, well, what does your church do? Well, we worship and we teach the Bible. Man, I don't know about you, but the church is supposed to be making disciples who make disciples. So we've got to know what we're trying to do, and we got to know how we're doing it. And with your disciple-making process, you will know what you're trying to do, and you'll know how you're going to do it. So where does it fit in the overall flow of your church? Well, think about it, the atom. The atom is something that God made. It was discovered by a man by the name of Demetrius, 400 BC. Unbelievable that he thought of an atom. And he cut an apple down to it's so small you couldn't cut it anymore. And he figured out that all matter must be made up of particles that are so small they cannot be cut. So the word atom is a Greek word, atomos, that means uncuttable. Well, in the 1600s, this theory became reality. Chemistry found out that atoms are real. It's not just some guy's weird idea. And then it was not until the 1930s that two nuclear physicists discovered that the uncuttable atom could be cut. And that when you cut it, it produces atomic power. And so think about your church. A lot of churches are like an atom with no nucleus. The nucleus of an atom is where the power comes from. But we have worship ministries, Bible study ministries, service ministries, those may be committees or whatever you call them. And then we usually have mission ministries. And they all revolve and rotate and interlap. But a lot of times there's no strategic intentionality. They're not strategic or intentional about what they're trying to do. These guys are teaching the Bible. These guys are driving golf carts, passing out bulletins. These guys are leading worship. These guys are going on mission trips and doing good work. But again, it's like the golden calf. We hope that we throw somebody in and out's going to come a disciple maker, but it's not happening. Most of the time it's not happening. So the goal would be, all right, keep doing this. You don't have to stop doing Sunday school. You don't have to stop doing studies on Wednesday night. You don't have to stop anything. But what if you had at the core of all this a pure disciple-making process where you were taking people in your Bible studies and getting them involved in a D group that meets anytime, anywhere. Picking people out of all these ministries and funneling them into a disciple-making process where they're learning how to make and multiply disciples as a way of life. And they begin to see it not as a program, but this becomes their lifestyle. This becomes who they are. Then you're beginning to build a disciple-making culture. When you have that disciple-making process, you're ready to set some exciting goals. When we think about nuclear fission is what happens when you split the nucleus of an atom. They learn that when you split that nucleus, it's explosive. Well, many years ago, a carpenter from Nazareth and 12 common men revealed a process of disciple-making that we could call spiritual fission. It's what happens when we multiply. When we multiply, it creates unbelievable power for growth. So in order to set some exciting goals in disciple making, there's only two questions you need to answer. How many D groups can you start with? So you may say, hey, I can start one. My wife can start one. I've got a couple of leaders that could start one. That's when we do the D-Life boot camps. If you did a D-Life boot camp, you might bring over some leaders, and you might have 4 or 5 or 10 that would say, man, I'm ready. Then you got to determine at what rate you can expect to multiply. We train people in D-Life to try to multiply every year. I'm going to try to multiply every year as a D group leader. But probably church-wide, you're not going to see all your groups multiply. So let's just say for a smaller church, your D-Life multiplication rate might be 40% or 50%. For a larger church, it might be 30%. Well, you're ready to set some goals. This is what we call your DMR, your D group multiplication rate. That's the rate that you reasonably expect your D groups to multiply each year. Well, let me just show you a couple of scenarios. All right, let's say that you're a smaller church and you think that you could start with 4 D groups. You're going to lead one, maybe your wife, maybe you got a couple of guys that are really fired up about it. And you feel like that you could multiply at a 40% rate. And guys, that's so easy. You got so many people in your church that are already mature believers, that have all this knowledge because you've been teaching them the Bible for years, and all they knew was, keep learning. I mean, you could be a D group leader and get a mature believer to help you lead the group, and you can have them ready to multiply within 6 weeks. But let's just say if you had a 40% DMR and you took a 10-year growth strategy, this would be the reality of your church. You would have 4 D groups. That year you would do 24 ministry projects outside the walls of your church, because those 4 would do 6, and you hold them accountable to that. And then you would produce 2 new leaders. Year 2, you would do 36 ministry projects outside the walls. And then you'd only produce 2 new leaders because you had a 40% rate. Look where it goes in 10 years. In 10 years, if you're just multiplying, look at this. This is reasonable. 2, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, 16. You get down here and you're only in the 20s. You could have 80 discipleship groups, and let's say there's 5 in a D group. That's over 400 people in your discipleship groups. You would do 480 ministry projects outside the walls of your church, and you would have 32 new leaders, hopefully, as you move into year 11. That's what we call strategic, intentional growth. These are SMART goals. These are goals that are simple, they're measurable, they're attainable. You have a plan to achieve them. The D-Life Boot Camp, if I were to lead one for your association, you would get all those training materials. So once you see it done, then you could lead that boot camp in your church every year. So that when you create these new people, you take them through the training. You keep this process pure. So this is what your 10-year future could look like. You could have more in discipleship than maybe you have in attendance. Let's say you're a larger church and you could begin with 30 D groups, and you're going to set a lower 33.3% DMR. So you'd do 180 ministry projects the first year. You'd have 10 new leaders come out of those 30. Look where you'd be in 10 years. 400 discipleship groups, 2,400 ministry projects outside the walls of your church, and you're producing over 100 new leaders a year. Now that may seem like those are crazy goals. You know why they're crazy is because of the missing link. We have not had a multiplying process of discipleship. What if you had a multiplying process? Something that was really organically multiplying and a simple tool to teach them how to do it as a way of life. You see, that's called spiritual fission. Without spiritual fission, without multiplication, these goals are not achievable. But if you have spiritual fission, these goals are attainable. A well-known pastor of a very popular megachurch, I'm not going to call his name, but you would recognize it. In his book, he said that church growth is like catching spiritual waves. I'm not sure what he means by that. I think that might mean you move into the right area of town that's really growing, and you get some cool guys with skinny jeans and cool hair, and you get video walls, and you do it better than everybody else, and everybody's going to flock to your church, so you're catching a spiritual wave. I'm like, come on, man. I think Jesus never talked about catching a spiritual wave. He talked about doing a greater work. He said, if you are my disciple, you're going to do the work that I do. What work was he talking about? Disciple making. And he says, you're going to do a greater work than me. You're going to do it greater than I do because there's more of you. So instead of waiting to catch a wave, what if we just did the greater work? Then we could make our own waves by making disciples who make disciples. Hey, thank you guys for watching. I would love for you to visit our webpage. It's livethedlife.com. You can go to the webpage, read more about D-Life. You can see all the places where we've done training in the past. You can see where our next 5 training events are going to be. You can sign up for a free demo of the D-Life tool. You can order materials from there. Thank you, Bill. We do appreciate the opportunity you're being with us.
For you churches that would be interested in pursuing D-Life, as a network, GTBN has invested in the process and the app. If we have a couple of churches ready to launch now, we will partner with them for a boot camp. We also have resources available that if you're led to launch a D-Life group right now, we can help you get started. So if you're pursuing D-Life, certainly contact Bill through the app. Definitely let me know at jturnbow@gtbn.us, and we'll be glad to help you further. God bless you. Thank you for watching.